let's speak to James Ball, who's political editor of The New World. James, you're very welcome to the programme today. We've had numerous people, dozens of people, contacting me. They work in small businesses and saying that national insurance rises have led to jobs being shed. They have led to businesses making very big decisions about not employing extra people. What do you make of what Rachel Reeves has been saying this week?
I think she's in something of a tricky position, especially on national insurance. The reality is that this budget was relatively well received by the actual financial markets. UK government debt has got cheaper. It's got cheaper relative to the US. The spread has closed. It's actually sort of reassured people in terms of the borrowing, the government's responsibility, the spending. So some of it is good news for her. But some of the ways she's done it have been particularly hard for businesses. I think especially small businesses who employ people part-time, perhaps on minimum wage, they've been whacked by several minimum wage hikes in a row. They've got rising costs elsewhere, inflation's still not under control. And for the first budget, those hikes to employers' national insurance were brutal, and especially for part-time workers. And I don't think there's really a way around that. Labour can argue that it had to find the money because under Rishi Sunak, Jeremy Hunt did two quite major tax cuts that he couldn't afford just before the election in a bit of a desperate ploy. But instead of just reversing them, where they could have legitimately blamed the Tories, they did this clever employers hike too. And, you know, I speak to people in small businesses. They are struggling with this. That is not false. That's not political. That's real.
Yeah, and certainly they would have asked why Rachel Reeves felt she needed to do that. Certainly she talked about a black hole, the OBR. We were familiar of the big controversy regarding the Office of Budgetary Responsibility and whether that black hole exists and what it will look like and all the rest of it. I wonder, just when it comes to energy bills, the Prime Minister spoke yesterday in the House of Commons about this. He was probed by Kemi Badenoch. Let's just remind ourselves what she asked him about energy bills and what he said.
Let's start with the Energy Secretary, who wants to recycle himself as leader. He said he'd cut families' energy bills by £300. Can the Prime Minister tell the House how much have energy bills fallen by since the election?
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to say we're taking £150 off energy bills. I can also tell her that that's on top of the £150 we've taken off last year for the 3 million poorest families, now for 6 million poorest families.
Mr. Speaker, I asked him about energy bills. You could power the national grid on all of that hot air. He promised to cut energy bills by £300. Energy bills have risen by £187.
Certainly those rises in energy bills have been felt by so many of our viewers and listeners. James, what do you make of what the Prime Minister said last night? Or yesterday afternoon, I should say, because there are so many people who are really questioning the veracity of what the Chancellor and the Prime Minister are saying here. Are we being gaslit?
I don't think we are on this one. I think the tricky thing is that there's a lot of different bits that go into your energy bill. There's just the cost of generating it, and that depends on things like the oil and gas price, the wholesale, and they've gone up. When Rachel Reeves announced in the budget that there was going to be a cut to energy bills, that's real. They're basically taking some of the net zero costs, they're called policy costs, and moving it into general taxation, which means you're paying it from another bit of your bill, let's be honest. But the energy bill will come down. That sort of standing charge will come down next year, and that will be worth between £150 to £300 for most of us. Now, whether that was politically worth it, who knows? Because it's quite expensive to do it.
But I mean, I'm just sitting
Reeves
here.
wouldn't have to raise as many taxes if she hadn't done it.
I mean, I'm just sitting.
And it's £10 a month. Will people notice?
Well, that's a very good point, James. And I'm just sitting here with so many people getting in touch with me saying they've already been told their bills are going up. Now, that might be for slightly different reasons, but you can understand why people are at least sceptical when they hear the Prime Minister saying your bills are going to go down by £150 or £300, when so many people, that is just not their experience.
Oh, I completely sympathise. I can see why people are wary of this. I can see why people feel burned several times. There is a policy measure in there that will take some money off. But if other costs are increasing, if people are coming off deals, it might mean that for them, their bills just going up by less, and why should they trust that Reeves has done anything for them when, let's be honest, they have been quite shifty and quite dancing around various points on this budget, even if at its core it hasn't done that much. It certainly hasn't put on new costs to the bills that weren't there before. It has done something to take them off. But I completely see why people feel sceptical about that. I can understand that.
Tell me your thoughts on rough sleeping. This is something I know a bit about. I worked as a special advisor for a year and a half in the housing department, and the measures that we put in got rough sleeping down to 2% in the first year and 9% in the second year. It's something that I feel really quite passionately about. There are two main types of homelessness, as I know you know, James, but there are perhaps people who don't know the two main types of homelessness. One is people in temporary accommodation, who are maybe in bed and breakfast, which is often a dreadful thing. And then there are people sleeping on our streets. Often when people think of homelessness, they just think of people sleeping on the streets. But there's sort of rough sleeping, and then there's people in temporary accommodation. But the government is launching a homelessness strategy. It wants to halve rough sleeping in the next 5 years and reduce the number of people living in bed and breakfast. I mean, I remember Polly Neat, Baroness Neat, who's the head of shelter, telling me on one occasion, Peter, the babies don't learn to crawl because there is not enough room in the bed and breakfast for them to be able to do that. It's an absolutely disgraceful thing, both people living on our streets and people in that temporary accommodation, something the government needs to do a lot more about. Now we have Andy Burnham, the Greater Manchester Mayor, criticising the Prime Minister about it. I will criticise Andy Burnham for many things, but I know from personal experience that he really does care about this issue. But perhaps, and I don't mean to be cynical about this, but perhaps a secondary element of this is that he can be seen to criticise the Prime Minister in this. How much politics is in this, do you think, James?
I think, unfortunately, there's a healthy mix of politics in this. As you know better than I do, you've done a lot of work on this. Rough sleeping is one of those rare problems where actually the government can almost abolish it. They can pretty much fix it, and it's happened before. This is doable. Ending the use of temporary accommodation is much, much harder and maybe even impossible. You can reduce it. But rough sleeping, at different points, we've had virtually at zero under different governments. And I think for a Labour government, especially a Labour government that's trying to make a bit of a case that welfare spending is important, that people get vulnerable, I don't think anything less than getting rid of it is a decent goal. I think they should be doing this. I think pressuring them is good. I think there is some very heavy wariness over any time Andy Burnham criticises the government at the moment, because let's be honest, he completely misjudged it at Labour conference.
But he continues perhaps to be on manoeuvres. Let's talk about another political issue just before you go, James, and this is about the European Convention on Human Rights. Robert Jenrick says reform of that is doomed to fail. Can Keir Starmer get the kind of reforms needed so that we can actually deport people who are here illegally? If people go through an asylum claim, they are rejected for that. Some people, of course, are deported, about 4,500 last year, but there are problems on many appeals are made under human rights legislation. What do you think of this?
I think Robert Jenrick's in a tricky position here, because it's not Keir Starmer's initiative, but it's something he's jumped on and helped. They're trying to get a political reform of the court and a new interpretation of those laws for the judges. Now, Denmark started this effort, and when it started it only had one ally. It was Denmark and Austria. There were two countries. About 6 months ago, there were 9 governments that were on board to try and do this. There's now 27, and that's huge momentum in just 6 months. And the UK is kind of behind organising this. There's 48 in total. This isn't a European Union thing. This is a Council of Europe thing. So there's already a majority of governments. They're pushing to try and see if they can get a statement everyone agrees. I think it's a little bit tricky for Jenrick to say it's impossible or it won't do anything when, he sat on this brief, he was there on justice, and he didn't manage to get this far. And so I imagine, selfishly, he's probably rooting for it to fail. But there's actually some solid progress here. There's some consensus with governments of quite different political stripes in Europe that it is possible to have these human rights, but to say no, the way the courts have been interpreting them is too strict, is wrong. The balance is wrong, and I think if it's doable, that would be quite a significant win.
It'll be very interesting to see.
It's like Cameron's negotiation in Europe.
Well, those are the echoes certainly that I was thinking about from 10 years ago, or 11 or 12 years ago, certainly. Listen, thank you, James. Very good to talk to you. James Ball there, political editor of The New World.